The novel adaptations have been resurrected for one more time. Who knows, we could get more novel adaptations depending how this goes. To celebrate 30 years of the Virgin Missing Adventures, we see Goth Opera adapted by Elizabeth Miles, originally written by Paul Cornell. And this has been on many people's list to be adapted and get the big finish treatment. I think one of the problems with the original novel adaptations run was the selection of stories. And maybe this is a future video. We are in a very interesting place with the novel adaptations, with the recasts. So the world is Big Finish's oyster in terms of the Virgin Missing Adventures and New Adventures. But for now, Goth Opera, this was an absolute delight because Goth Opera is an interesting book because it's the first sort of a bit of expanded media where we're really fleshing out these characters. And obviously, Big Finish have done amazing things with Colin Baker and Paul McGann, but this is the first time expanded media have dealt with the Fifth Doctor TARDIS crew. And obviously, Big Finish have done great things. We praise Davison's Big Finish stories, but this is the first time where we examine this TARDIS crew with the vulnerability of companions and the fear of loss, and Nissa at the heart of it being a vampire, and the Fifth Doctor's fear of losing another companion.
And his love of tea, funnily enough.
Yeah, this
Something that
plays a lot.
surprised even Davison in this one recording it. The Fifth
Yes.
Doctor is asking for and consuming quite a few cups of tea throughout this one. He gets through it like a vampire gets through blood.
And quite, yeah, it's even more in the book because this is an interesting review because I've read the book, did a review back in 2017. So I've got the perspective of the book. You haven't read the book.
No, this is my first experience of this story.
Yeah.
I mean, I heard things here or there. Obviously, know that infamous cover with Nissa covered in bloods. But yeah, as for the main story beats, this was my first experience of that. And I know there are some changes there. I know there's some babies missing. Romana missing.
Yeah.
A whole little subplot on the moon, mostly cut.
Yeah, you get little bits like when you see them go into the future, that's meant to be the Hemivores and the Ancient One.
So there really was some lore that they
away
from in there.
Like you said about the baby, I think that's one of my main negatives of this adaptation, because I think the baby really symbolizes Nissa's character wonderfully. That she is such a kind and open character, and yet she's willing to help this baby, but the baby is this sort of symbol of innocence, and Nissa just being pure and innocence, having this sort of sweet and innocence thing just being demonic with blood and yellow eyes, taking advantage of Nissa. I think it really displays a character really well, and I think the scene doesn't land that well in the adaptation. It's very quick and it's over, and that's such a big moment in the book. This is the epicenter of this story, really.
Yeah, it's the catalyst for where everything goes from there.
Yeah,
because this story is very much divided into two halves, I feel.
Mm-hmm.
You very much got the villains side of things. You've got Yarvek and Time Lady Ruaf. Yeah, and Nissa getting involved in that world of the vampires. You've got Madeline and her love interest there. Jake, I believe, was the character's name, wasn't it? You've got quite a lot of different vampire characters here, all with their own motivations. I like how it treats the vampires. They're not all just, these sent up.
It's contemporizing them for the 90s. A bit like what Moffat did with Dracula.
Yeah, and also expanding upon what Doctor Who usually would do with its villains. This isn't your typical classic Who style story. It very much humanizes them and gives them their own individual personalities and motivations beyond just generic wanting to rule the world or whatever. It's very much a step up from where they began in State of Decay. And I think it's quite nice how, you are following them for quite a bit of the story. And then the Fifth Doctor and Tegan are playing catch up with that a lot of the time. They don't even realize much is going on until towards the end of part one, really.
Mhm.
This is a three-part story, each part about an hour long, by the way, for the context there. You've got something atypical from your usual Doctor Who story there. It's not necessarily one driven by the Doctor and companions. It's one more driven by the villains. And at times, that's the more interesting side of the plot, I would say.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it does feel like certain elements of the plot on the other side sort of come out of nowhere. You've got this evangelist
I
character
think the
only
Victor
over in a
Lang
minute.
side is the weakest part of the story.
Yeah,
Even in the book, that's the weakest part where you decide I just want to get through this little bit.
it feels like almost a sidestep of sorts.
Hmm.
Yeah, I don't know. And then it doesn't really lead too much. It sort of adds a nice bit of scale towards the end, but at the same time, I think you could have lost that and not really lost anything from the story itself. Feels wrong to say, really.
Yeah, but
Because I do think there's something to be said about that, seeing the human side of things, how humanity reacts to vampires in their midst, especially one like that who is very religious and this gang around him who are equally as, well, even more so, zealots, really.
yeah. Well, I guess it's sort of the human equivalent of the vampires, isn't it?
Hmm. And I mean, you've always got those characters with the pitchforks coming out in these kinds of stories.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think where you're seeing the more human side of the vampires, it's nice to see the more beastly side of the humans.
Hmm.
Yeah. But also the way it just weaved into the plot sort of fell a bit flat, really.
Yeah.
I do think there's some terrific performances in this though, particularly from the core trio,
Yes.
of Peter Davison, Janet Fielding, and Sarah Sutton here. Particularly, I think Tegan comes off very well in this story.
Yeah, because you've got a sort of still reeling off snake dance because
Like
he's
you were
still a bit.
saying earlier about expanding upon
Yeah.
characters from TV. This is their first real go at doing that. And so it makes perfect sense for this to be the point where Expanded Media chooses to jump on with that.
Hmm. So I think there's a lot, especially in the Fifth Doctor TV, there's a lot of unspoken words there.
Hmm.
And I think the expanded media really gets it. And I think this does it wonderfully. And I think both companions shine brilliantly because you've got Nissa trying to find a cure for, for vampirism, until they've got until the next full moon, very cliche horror type stuff. And obviously Nissa being again very innocent, not wanting to kill humans or anything, and just seeing her be sort of pushed into that sort of space. Then you've got the Doctor trying to keep her sort of level-headed. Who I think this, like you say, really plays a sort of the quintessential British English gent for Davison. Tea, cricket in Tasmania. And just, I think the darker the story, the Fifth Doctor really shines because he's just doesn't really know what to do. But I think there's sort of a bit of a McCoy edge to him in a way because he sort of manipulates.
He's keeping things from Tegan. Yeah, it's always interesting to see the Doctor as slightly more flawed morally. That's always the more interesting direction to go. And it's certainly the direction that the Virgin novels pushed, wasn't it? I mean, they were known for being quite adult, and this is one of the few Doctor Who stories which has the adult material tag on it.
Yeah.
On the Big Finish website, it says, "Warning: this release contains adult material and may not be suitable for younger listeners." It's something you see all over Torchwood, but you're not usually used to seeing over Doctor Who because that's the family-friendly show.
But I think it works for this story because you can really push the vampire side
Mm.
of it. And you especially get it when they're sort of describing what humans are to them. We're cattle, and sort of how they mature the blood. Like it gets proper detail into like the nitty gritty of it, as it were. So I'm glad that it didn't shy away from it because I think that's one of the wonderful things of the book is the horror of it. And
Mm.
if you are going to do a vampire story, you want to do it justice.
Yeah. I mean, I wouldn't say it goes so far to the extent that it needed this tag, though.
No, I feel
Like,
like it balances it. There's a fine line there.
like I think it goes about the same distance as State of Decay does,
Yeah.
really, which I still think works as a piece of family entertainment. Like, there's War Master stories I feel that go further in the adult direction that probably needed that tag more than this story does.
Mhm.
So I would say don't necessarily be scared by that. And, it's not full of swearing or anything like that. But I think
No.
it's definitely got a more mature edge to it. Yeah, I think like having that on there maybe paints it as a dark story than it actually is. And I think perhaps could get people's hopes up into thinking it's something worse than it actually is. So
Hmm.
yeah, I don't know if it's worth paying too much attention to. Although if you are particularly uneasy around, discussions
The thought
of
of blood.
blood and such, then yeah, I mean, you're probably already looking to steer clear of this one because it's a vampire story and you were expecting that. Yeah, it was just a funny little thing to have there, and also to hear when you start up the audio after the Big Finish ident. You've got Nick Briggs reading that out loud. Which, yeah, it's
I mean, this is technically classed as a
unusual.
lost story as well in the credits. Janet Fielding says "Lost Story, Goth Opera."
Yeah, is it Lost or is it in the
Yeah,
credits? I
yeah, I
know it
think it
was
is.
mentioned.
So
Because I know it
yeah.
was brought up in the extras as well.
Hmm.
When because David O'Mahony, who directed and produced this, was also or is also director and producer on the Lost Stories. So I don't know if some wires got crossed there. I mean, maybe that's something that's going to be corrected on the update of this because they have
Yes, there
said
are
they're reissuing it
there are
after
a
some
few
issues.
technical issues like the TARDIS doors going off, which doesn't make any geographical sense when you're
Yeah, so
listening.
it's the interior doors, like bedroom doors and such. When they go, for whatever reason, the TARDIS, it's the sound of the TARDIS interior doors opening, which yeah is weird.
I will defend one of the faults, which is episode one's cliffhanger. The music for this again is sublime. I love it. It leads
Mm.
into the opening title sequence, which is the closing theme used for the end of the episode, and it works
And
wonderfully. I love it when they incorporate the Doctor Who theme in the incidental music.
and with the scream as well, the way that all comes together is rather wonderful. You sit there and you think, wow, they did a really good job with that.
Yeah, yeah, it's really
Yeah.
good.
Hmm. Yeah, that's something that didn't necessarily bother me. Neither was the Castoborus. I have little
I can't say I picked that
mispronunciation.
up, to be honest.
No, I think it's something that happens on TV a lot of the time anyway. I
Matt
know
Smith
people
did
say we
it. It's
should,
fine.
yeah, with Metabolists. I know people say we should hold Big Finish to a higher standard with things like that, but at the same time, it's nice just to have those things every once in a while. Just look at it as a fun little. Oh, for whatever reason, that was just what it was in that moment. It's
Yeah.
not something that affects the
Well, look how
story in
Tom
any
Baker
way.
says Gallifrey.
Hmm.
You know, he's got a completely different pronunciation to any other one. It's fine. These things happen.
Yeah, we can get over them. Ruaf, I wasn't necessarily enamored with at first.
I was like that with Yarvin.
Bruce. Ah,
I think Yarvin didn't seem to have the authority and dominance I wanted from the character. I didn't think he had the magnetism and charm to be the
I
great vampire king. I didn't get that.
I quite liked him, but I do
Ah,
feel like towards part three, it had a problem with not knowing who its main villain was.
hmm
Like you sort of got both of them in equal focus. Then, as the story develops, it feels like it all starts to come apart towards the end because there's not enough focus on either one of them.
yeah.
Yeah. It's hard to say without spoiling as to why, but
Mhm.
yeah, it didn't quite feel right towards the end there for me. Yeah, and it all comes down to the way the two villains were handled. I mean, overall, I did have a good time with this one. I feel like I blitzed through it pretty quickly. I was never bored listening to it. I was never checking my watch thinking, right, when are we going to get this one finished? I was just having a good time immersing myself in the world, learning about all this vampire lore, really. And I
Hmm.
think, at the end of the day, that's all I could have asked for. I'd say it's a solid 8 out of 10.
Yeah, I mean, for me, I like this story because I spend a fair bit of time in Manchester. And I'm like, I know where these places, and like, yeah, using homeless people as like food and stuff. Yeah,
Well, is that what you do on your usual trips to Manchester?
yeah, yeah. I do a Nissa and just yeah, do all that stuff. But yeah, for me, reading the
Get
book,
takeaway on the street corner.
literally quite a takeaway. Um, reading the book, if I was to experience Goth Opera, I would go right to the source material. I think it's a brilliant book. I think this, if you've read the book and you're curious, just to hear the lines spoken, it's worth picking up. Like I say, it's great for our TARDIS trio. I think,
Also great if you want something a little bit different from usual Fifth Doctor stories.
yeah,
This one does have a distinct tone to it from the others, which go very 80s at the moment. And I mean, I love what the Fifth Doctor Adventures is doing at the moment. But if perhaps they're not for you, then maybe this is worth checking out just for something a bit different from that.
yeah, and I think if you want more novel adaptations, like Big Finish have said this is a one-off to celebrate 30 years. But if the sales are there, who knows? We could see more down the line. So
Mm.
buy the things you love. Show support, show up. So you want more of these things. But if I was to give Goth Opera a rating, I'd give it a 9 out of 10.
Ooh, very strong.
I will say I found part one quite choppy, but I'm gonna leave that
Yeah,
down to the editing,
yeah, we'll
possibly.
see how much gets fixed with the reissue of it. But let us know your thoughts on Goth Opera, both book and audio, both if you've experienced both, down in the comments below. We'd love to hear you sound off your thoughts down there. And we'll catch you in the next video.
Bye
Goodbye,
bye.
everyone.